there, my name is Pam. Welcome to my channel where we have chaotic crafting fun. Today I'm going to show you how I made this tail to go with the ears I made in my last video. Without further ado, let's get some tail. To begin, source some reference photos for inspiration. You may want to measure from your waist to your knees so you'll know approximately how long you want your tail to be. I basically stood in front of a mirror and held a measuring tape out behind me so I could see how long my tail was going to be. Next, draw or sketch out a pattern on some Bristol board or a large piece of paper. If you don't have a large piece of paper or some Bristol board, you can tape some other pieces of paper together until you get one large enough that will fit the pattern of your tail on it. I modeled my pattern on a foxtail. Granted, the jury is still out on whether I was successful or not in that endeavor. Next, I cut out my pattern. Then I traced my pattern onto the backside of some faux fur. Keep in mind the direction of the fur when you're tracing your pattern out. So the direction of the fur is going the direction you want it to go. Generally speaking, I think animal fur goes towards the tip of the tail. So I made sure that my fur was going in that direction when I traced my pattern onto the fur. Make sure to trace around a ½ inch of seam allowance around the outside of your pattern as well. Then flip your pattern over and repeat for the opposite side, again keeping in mind the direction of the fur as you do so. Depending on how long you want your fur to be, you can shave it down a little bit at this point if you want. I didn't, I just left mine long because I wanted mine to be extra floofy. Instead of just sewing my tail pieces together and stuffing it, I decided I wanted my tail to have a little bit more rigidity and form, so I created a spine, some boning per se, to go inside my tail. I traced the top part of my tail onto some foam core. Then I cut that piece out. I then cut these spine pieces into smaller pieces around 4 inches in width. Then I trimmed down the edges to allow for a little bit more movement between the pieces. Or so I thought. If I made this project again, I would definitely do this differently. This is just how I made this particular tail. At the time, my brain told me this was the way I should be doing this. To keep my spine pieces all together, I cut a piece of aluminum wire that was long enough to reach the end of the tail and back again. I then taped the spine pieces to my original pattern to prevent them from moving and to ensure they would still fit inside the tail. Then I glued the wire to the foam core with hot glue. To prevent the wire from pulling away from the foam core, my brain decided that I needed to cover the whole thing with 2mm craft foam and glue that down with more hot glue. Thanks, brain! Then, because my brain likes symmetry, I covered the other side with craft foam as well, even though it was probably completely unnecessary. Next, I pinned the fur pieces together with the fur sides facing each other. I moved the fur away from the edges as much as I could as I pinned them together. Then I sewed the pieces together. Take your time with this because the fur is very thick and it probably would have helped if I had shaved the fur down a bit ahead of time. Keep in mind that you will need to stuff the tail after flipping it inside out. You will also need to have room to flip the tail back right side out again. So leave a large enough hole at the base of the tail so that you can turn it right side out again. I unfortunately didn't leave a large enough hole at the base of the tail and had to rip out a portion of the seam in order to be able to flip it right side out again, which was a pain in my behind. I inserted the spine into the tail and then started stuffing from the tip forward until I was happy with its fullness, being careful not to overstuff or overfluff it at this point in time. Adding too much stuffing I felt would make the tail a little bit too weighty. I also trimmed some of the seam allowance off at this point so my spine piece would fit nicer. Next time I think I would make this spine piece a little bit wider somehow by adding foam core spinous processes off the sides. But hindsight is 20/20 and my foresight is nearsighted. So I didn't do that. I then marked where I wanted the belt to go through the tail. I cut a hole big enough through the foam core for my belt to pass through it. I then made a tube for my belt to slide through. I borrowed this technique from another channel, Nefertiti, who has many great tutorials on tails. Basically, just cut the piece of fabric big enough for the belt to slide through, Sew the edges together and turn the tube right side out. Testing it, of course, to make sure that your belt still slides through it after sewing it together. I did have to cut a hole in the foam core a little bit wider at this point to allow for that tube and the belt to slide through it. And I was very lucky that I had placed the aluminum wire so close to the edge of the foam core that I could still slide the belt and that belt sleeve through it. I marked and cut a hole in the fur on either side for the belt to slide through, then hand sewed the belt sleeve to these holes and cut off the excess. I then realized I wanted a plate or flat piece to rest against my back where the tail would sit. So I cut out a piece of foam core that would fit in that area and glued it to the end of the spine piece. I then covered this piece of foam core with more of the brown felt I used for the belt sleeve. Then I glued the end of the fur to the tail spine and hand sewed the remaining seam. Then I stuffed the belt through the belt hole and paraded around the house with my tail because I can, and it's fun. And who told you that you couldn't do fun things as an adult? Shame on them. They're just boring. Don't be old and boring. The funniest part of this was that my dog Nitro seemed to be so confused by my new appendage. This video has been part of an original cosplay that I'm working on. Check out this video where I made the ears for this cosplay. And subscribe so you don't miss the next video in this series. Until next time, happy crafting and stay weird, my friends. Bye!